welcome to Mimamsa Foundation for Indic Studies' second Justice Ranade Memorial Lecture. Mimamsa Foundation for Indic Studies is a forum where we attempt to provide well-researched, objective and authentic perspective to understand India in a well-rooted Indian way. What we mean by Indian way is that we believe that India, with its distinct socio-civilizational character, must be studied with those socio-political and civilizational realities. And unless we sort of treat India with those realities, understanding India will always be incomplete. This broadly goes today by the name Indic Studies or Indic Perspectives. We at Mimamsa do that through well-researched articles, lecture series, video interviews, and to expand our initiatives, since last year, Mimamsa Foundation for Indic Studies constituted Justice Ranade Memorial Lecture. This is the second edition of Justice Ranade Memorial Lecture, and we are delighted to have Professor Pankaj Jain with us. At the outset, let me also thank Ranade Realtors from Pune, who have generously supported this Memorial Lecture initiative. We therefore want to thank our sponsors for that. I'll briefly introduce our speaker today. Professor Jain is currently head of the Department of Humanities and Languages and also the chair of India Center at Flame University, Pune. Earlier, he was a founding co-chair of India Initiative and associate professor at the Department of Philosophy and Religion and Anthropology at the University of North Texas. He is also a PhD from University of Iowa and an MA from Columbia University, both in religious studies. He recently co-edited volume India and the Western Philosophical Concepts in Religion. He has also compiled Jain and Hindu history in America for his monograph titled Dharma in America, a short history of Hindu and Jain diaspora. He is also author of an award-winning Dharma and Ecology of Hindu Communities, Sustenance and Sustainability, and Science and Socio-Religious Revolution in India, Moving the Mountains. I'm extremely delighted to formally welcome Professor Jain to this second Justice Ranade Memorial Lecture. Thank you, Professor Jain, for accepting the invitation and joining us today.
Thank you, Akshay. Thank you for taking this initiative. We really need more and more people like you and your foundations who can do some Indic-oriented research and spread these ideas, because we have been missing these ideas for the last 75 years or probably more within India, and we really need to spread these ideas. So let's start. I'll start with my presentation. So I'll start my presentation with noting that the title, India and Indology through Dharma and Dharmic Categories. As you noted in my bio, I come from religious studies background. So my focus or my orientation, my research has been studying India, to study India from Dharmic or Dharma categories, not religious categories. That is what is my focus. That is what I'll attempt to present. Also, before going ahead, I should note that there has been one pioneering book at least that was written probably at least more than 30 years back. That was an edited volume by Professor McKim Marriott of Chicago University of Chicago. That was called as India Through Hindu Categories. But after that, very little progress has been made to develop Indic categories to study India or maybe other cultures also. So my research is a small, humble attempt in that direction. Like you noted, we need Indic categories to study India, Indology. So that is what I will attempt to present in my presentation, and how I have been using some of these categories to study some of the phenomena that we have in India, environmental phenomena and so on, as I'll show. All right, so before we proceed further, we have to note that how exactly is Dharma different from religion? So if we apply religion paradigm to study India, how that would be an injustice to Indic study, and how Dharma or Dharmic categories can be better way to study India. So before we proceed, let's study Dharma itself, and let's try to define Dharma, because we have to remind ourselves, even though it's part of all our Indian languages, including Marathi, which is your language, I guess, and Hindi and Kannada, Tamil, Telugu, Bengali, Assamia, every Indian language has a prominent word, Dharma, which is used by all people of all languages in India, across India. And what are the different meanings that people use, people apply to this word dharma? Dharma, of course, means religion. It also means customary observances, law usage, practice, religious or moral merit, virtue, righteousness, duty, justice, piety, morality, and sacrifice. These are just some of the meanings that are in the dictionary by Monier Williams, or even Apte dictionary that we use Sanskrit to English dictionaries. So dharma itself has wide-ranging meaning, and why it has so many meanings, and what are the implications of all these meanings, what it does to India, study of India or Indic studies or Indology, that is what we will see. Well, let's see more of the interpretations of dharma in different texts of India. And so let's start with what Paul Hecker and Wilhelm Elphas noted about dharma. So they come from European perspective, German Indologists. Both noticed that Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's Dharma Tattva, and also after him, Aurobindo Ghosh and Rabindranath Tagore and Mahatma Gandhi and Vinoba Bhave, they all attempted to develop the dharma paradigm and try to apply that to Indian society. But what Hecker and Elphas note is that their attempt to develop dharma was influenced by European civilization, European theories, and underlying that is the Christian theory of Protestant ideology to do charity for global good, to spread ideas globally. So what Hecker and Elphas note is that dharma was developed by recent 19th century, 18th century scholars and leaders in India, but they were all influenced by European ideas. So they call them neo-Hindus. So they take dharma as a very recent neo-Hindu attempt to develop as a replica or as an influence from Christianity. And so it's a very recent phenomenon from Hecker and Helfas' perspective. They are extremely influential, especially Wilhelm Helfas has been extremely influential scholar, Indologist for last 30 years. His book came Europe and India, and that has remained extremely influential book, of course, in the West, but also indirectly it influences the study of India, even in India. So that is their major critique of the word dharma itself. So in my work, in my publication, my first book, I responded to that criticism by noticing that Guru Jambheshwar, who never studied English, I mean, he was born in 1451 to 1536. There was no English that time in India, so there was no European influence, right? Yet when he speaks about dharma in archaic, antique Rajasthani language, he was in Rajasthan in desert area. He was the guru leader of the Bishnoi community that he founded. So in my first book, what I show in my work is that Guru Jambheshwar, when he uses the word dharma, he uses in an ethical sense, exactly like how Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay or Aurobindo Ghosh or Tagore or Gandhi or Vinoba Bhave developed it as an ethical concept, as a universal principle in 18th, 19th, 20th century. Similarly, Guru Jambheshwar did that in the 15th century. So it cannot be a European influence when dharma is equated with ethics. That is the first point. To respond to European Elphas and Hecker's allegation that dharma is a very recent phenomenon, that it's a influence of Christian or European theories. So that is the first point I want to make here. Now, if we go to the origin of the word dharma, we know the root of dharma is dhri. Dhri means to sustain, support, and hold. Right? These are the meanings of dharma. Now, dhri, sustain, support, or hold. So in the Vedas, we know that these are the sayings: Prithivim dharmana dhritam. That Prithvi, earth, is supported by dharma. Right? Similarly, in the Rig Veda, in the Purush Sukta, Tani dharmani prathmani asan. So in that line in Purush Sukta 1090, dharma replaces the word ritam. So Purush Sukta being a later addition, dharma replaces ritam. Ritam simply meant cosmic or ecological rhythm. So in my opinion, even rhythm word in English may be cognate with ritam in Sanskrit, ancient Vedic Sanskrit, right? And so ritam is replaced by dharma in the Purush Sukta in the Rig Veda. So even there, dharma is accepted, dharma is mentioned, and dharma is interpreted to mean cosmic or ecological rhythm. So we see dharma as a universal principle even in the Vedas. Dharma means to sustain, support, and what is it supporting in the Rig Veda, especially here? is that it supports the entire cosmic ecological rhythm. It maintains the sunrise and sunsetting. It maintains the planets. It maintains Prithvi, the Earth. It maintains universal rhythm. It sustains the universal cosmos. So that is the grand idea of Dharma, not just a recent 18th, 19th century phenomenon. It's an ancient Vedic concept. Right? It's using Vedas and using Jambeshwar's writings in words in Rajasthani. I try to show that Dharma is a universal concept. It's universalistic concept, not just a recent phenomenon. All right. Now, if we try to see more definitions of Dharma, we know that Purva Mimamsa Sutra by Jaimini says that Chodana Lakshanortho Dharma in Jaimini Sutra 1.1, which means that Vedic instructions are the means to understand and practice Dharma. That is a direct cause of the good, Shreyaskar, that is desirable. So Dharma signifies virtues and righteousness, even in later texts such as the Jaimini Sutra. Then in Buddhism and Jainism, in Jainism, most famously, Jains have declared Ahimsa as Paramo Dharma, or Kevali Panattam Dhammam Saranam Pavajjami, or Sahu Dhamma. Here, Dhamma simply means that the highest ethical principle is Ahimsa. That is the first line. Second is, I take refuge in the teachings of the people who are liberated, who have attained moksha. Those are the Kevalis. Kevalis means those who are already liberated, who have attained moksha. What they have taught, I take refuge in their teachings. And that is the Sahu Dhamma. Sadhu or Sahu means the noble people or liberated people. And their Dhamma is what I accept or I take refuge into. Then in Buddhism, we know that Buddha defined Dharma as his teachings and also rules and laws for the Buddhist community. So Dhammam Saranam Gacchami means I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Sangha, and I take refuge in Dharma or Dhamma, which means teachings or rules, teachings and rules and laws of the Buddhist community. So that is the Buddhist definition of Dharma. So we see this wide-ranging implications, interpretations, meanings of the word Dharma in different contexts is what I'm trying to show here. Now, if we go to later texts such as in the Mahabharata and other Dharma Sutras, so Van Buitenen, a Dutch scholar in 1957, he published this quotation of one of his writings, and then I got this quotation from his writings, is that all the four Purusharthas are also mere branches of Dharma. So Artha, Kama, and Dharma should not be deemed to refer to distinct different practices. In principle, all three are Dharma. So Dharma again is an overarching principle paradigm that includes even Artha, Kama, and Moksha, and Dharma, Artha, and Kama. And of course, Moksha is the final result of practicing Dharma throughout one's life and while pursuing different Purusharthas. Then in the Mahabharata 12th, 1:10, 11th verse, there is a saying in the Mahabharata which says, Dharana dharma iti ahur dharmena vidhartha prajaha yat syad dharanasyamyuktam sa dharma iti nishchayaha. Dharma is the principle that sustains this worldly affairs and the other worldly affairs. Again, it's a wide-ranging concept, universalistic concept, almost in the sense of cosmological rhythm that what we saw in the Rig Veda. All right. Then the next line is also from the Mahabharata, which is very, very common and very popular. Everybody knows this. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutthanam adharmasya. So here again, Dharma is that ethical principle or spiritual, cultural phenomenon that if it degrades itself, then the universal consciousness takes manifested form and it tries to re-establish itself, as we all know this very commonly. Then this image, if you take a look, Yato Dharmaha Tato Jayaha, that is coming from Indian Constitution, which means wherever there is Dharma, there right there is the victory, right there is the success. And even the last line of the Bhagavad Gita has the same meaning. All right. Then so also Bhagavad Gita says, imperfect Swadharma is better than perfect. Even perfect Paradharma is not to be preferred, but even imperfect Swadharma is better than Paradharma. Right? So Dharma again here is an ethical duty, virtue, principle, and so on. It's connected with again universalistic interpretations. One more definition. This is from Karnad's Vaisheshika Sutra, where it says, Yato bhyudaya nishreshayaha siddhi sa dharmaha. That which leads to attainment of well-being and the highest good is dharma. That is Karnad's Vaisheshika Sutra. Again, one more definition where it says, that dharma leads to attainment of well-being of everybody, of the entire universe, and that is the highest good, and that is dharma. Again, universalistic phenomenon. So what does it mean? So before going even deeper into interpretation, let's see one more definition. This is from the Ramayana, where dharma is defined as the truth, righteousness, steadiness of effort, compassion for creatures, and kindly words, reverence for Brahmins, gods, and guests. Right? So Atiti Devo Bhava and so on. Those are all part of dharma also. And that is what is demonstrated by the behavior, conduct of Lord Ram, Sri Ram, Prabhu Ram in Ramayana. So that's Rama itself, Lord Rama itself, himself is the seed of dharma. His conduct is a role model for dharma, how dharma is to be practiced. Now, by all of these interpretations, what we can learn is that dharma is that universal phenomenon that connects, of course, with the interpretation of religion, but it also connects with the interpretation of duty or ethical ideas or ethical practices. Dharma also connects with physical properties. So we know that there is Agni Dharma, there is Vriksha Dharma, there is Prithvi Dharma, and so on. So every physical object has its own physical characteristic, and that is also defined as dharma. So in that sense, I was using this word universalistic. So dharma has this universalistic interpretation that connects with spirituality, that connects with ethics, and that connects with ecological properties. And then, so dharma is that fine intersecting point, very subtle intersecting point, that is an overlap with supernatural world because it's spiritual idea. It connects with human world because it's ethical idea. And also it connects with natural world because it is a physical characteristic also. Dharma is defined as physical characteristic also. Now, so dharma in that sense, in these two senses, so linguistic sense, Waitman and Pandey, there are two linguists in European study research. They found that all Indian languages use dharma in these different senses of religion and duty and property. So it's a overarching transcendental word in that sense in linguistics, in languages, Indian languages. Dharma also is a overarching paradigm because in Parajuli's research, he found that dharma is what connects with supernatural world, human world, and natural world. So combining the linguistic model and an ethical model, we come to conclusion that also is noted by Ariel Grucklich in 1994 in his work. What he noted matches with my conclusion is that dharma is as a body, mind, environmental gestalt. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means that dharma, when people, especially Hindu people in India, when they are, let's say, taking a holy dip in the river Ganga, or Ganges in English, or Ganga, they are trying to transcend the boundaries that are led by their body or mind or even their environment. So dharma helps them transcend in everyday practices as a psychological phenomenon that connects them with ancient experiences that must have been experienced by ancient people or their rishis, their yogis, in which they transcended their body-mind divisions, in which they transcended their local environment, in which they transcended even their mind. So that is why Hindus are doing all these rituals. They go to different places for pilgrimage and so on, because dharma as a principle, as a practice, helps them transcend and experience the transcendental phenomenon of enlightenment, a glimpse of enlightenment, a glimpse of even moksha, of freedom from everyday experiences. That is what is dharma as defined by Ariel Grucklich. And that matches in these two figures also because it transcends all these boundaries of physical realities. All right, let's keep going. So dharma, in quoting two more scholars here, anthropologist Professor Anne Gold, and she noticed in her research in Rajasthan that human behaviors are irrevocably interwoven with the natural environment's condition. So the deterioration of one implies and involves the other. So as if ecology is degrading, let's say in a village in Rajasthan, people interpret it to mean that if they are not living by dharmic principles, their environment also suffers, and vice versa. If environment is degrading, if trees are being cut, that is a reflection of human greed. So again, dharma is used as a word to interpret that ecological phenomenon and ethical practices are interconnected. That is what she noted in her work in Rajasthan. And then I note from Frederick Smith's work in 2006, he quotes Mackie Marriott and Ronald Indian that I quoted in the beginning, Mackie Marriott's book, India Through Hindu Categories, and Ronald Indian, his book is Imagining India, both at University of Chicago, now retired. And then Arjun Appadurai's words also he quotes in his work in Frederick Smith, that in Indian context, and largely non-Western context, the difference between mind and body, a difference between culture and nature, is of degree rather than of kind. What he means by that is that it's a continuous spectrum or continuum where people don't really make any distinction or boundary between nature or culture, between mind or body. And how they use this as a continuum is the idea of, again, the word dharma. So what I've been deducing or suggesting is that the idea of dharma, the principle of dharma, is a must required principle to study India, because if you study India's environment, you have to bring in dharma. If you want to study India's ethical phenomena, you have to bring in dharma. If you want to study India's spiritual practices, you have to think from dharmic perspective. Because if we apply religion as a category, then we are already making distinction between ethics and spirituality and ecology. But if we bring in dharma as a category, we are interchangeably using this one word or one principle to study all the different phenomena across Indian society, across Indian environmental conditions, nature, and so on. That has been what I've been suggesting, what I've been suggesting in my publications and even here in this webinar. All right, so that is what I concluded in my first book. So dharma of nature, what humans can nudge. So dharma of nature can influence and inspire dharma of humans. That will, by default, will take care of eco-dharma. What does that mean? Dharma of nature in the sense that what humans can learn from Vriksha Dharma, Agni Dharma, Prithvi Dharma, that physical characteristic of fire or tree or even earth or nature should inspire and has inspired humans living in India for millennia to live by principles of dharma, human dharma, that is Manushya Dharma. And because they're living with dharmic principles for millennia, it has in turn taken care of their dharmic duties towards nature. So one does not have to be very consciously or distinctly environmentalist in Indian context, in traditional Indian context. Being an environmentalist is a byproduct of living with dharmic principles for millennia. So for example, in my work, I show that Bishnois and Swadhyayis and other communities in India, if they are protecting their flora and fauna in Rajasthan or Gujarat or elsewhere, it is not because they're environmentalist. It is because they follow the dharmic principles of ahimsa, non-violence, which reflects in their practice of vegetarianism, shakahari, right? So they are extreme. They consider their flora and fauna, their trees, their river bodies, water bodies, their animals and birds as part of their family, as part of their community. So it comes very natural for them to protect their flora and fauna, their wildlife, their plants, their trees, and so on, their water bodies, and so on. So these are all intertwined. Natural phenomena, ecological phenomena, ethical principles, and spirituality is all intertwined. One does not know where spirituality stops and environmentalism begins, or vice versa. Spirituality is environmentalism. Environmentalism is spirituality for these communities that live by dharmic principles such as Vishnois and Swadhyayis and so on. That is the whole paradigm shift, because if we don't bring in spirituality or dharmic principles to study the, let's say, nature protecting communities such as Vishnois or others, we are missing out on the most essential phenomenon that inspire these communities to live by the principles that in turn result in protection of the environment. That is the summary of my argument for last so many years. I've been saying these things and publishing these things. So that is what I can stop here and take some questions now. This is what is my summary of my main argument.
Professor Jain, for that very insightful intervention. I think that is something which is again at the core of understanding India, but how do we understand Dharma, and how do we sort of build our understanding based on this very keystone principle? And a lot of time that what is pertinent and that you sort of mentioned, that unless we understand this dharmic mindset, it's impossible to understand India in the sort of subsequently. And that is, I think, really interesting. I want to we had asked certain questions to our viewers, to our readers, and they have replied. So we are taking few questions from there. First one was very interesting. It says that how far Indic perspective is going to stand in this capitalistic or materialistic world. I mean, we always see this dichotomy between materialism and capitalism. We also have some philosophical strands within Indian school of thought which sort of give primacy to materialism or spiritualism at one end. So how do we sort of see Indic thought contextualized in this broader dichotomy?
Yes, for that question, I thought I'll start with this screen, this slide.
Yeah.
Where what we see here is the last two millennia of economic history of the world, where what we see from, let's say, first year itself, right? 1 CE, from 1 CE to, if we take a look at until 1820 CE, we know that India's share of the world GDP was more than 20%, right? So if we combine China and India, China is red here and India is orange. We combine China and India, we see that more than 50% of the share of the world GDP was being controlled by China and India. So what we can conclude from this is that until 1820, India was a major economic power of the world, right? And the rest of the world was almost negligent. So what that shows us is that India's spirituality or dharmic principles, dharmic practices were not an impediment in India's economic growth or trade phenomena that India was having with across the world. India was trading with as far back as Mesopotamia and Egypt and Rome and China and Southeast Asia. Indians were traveling all the way to Indonesia and so on. So economy is not an alternative to spirituality for Indian culture. As I was showing in my presentation, that dharmic principles were artha is part of dharma, right? So dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, the four purusharthas. Artha is very much a part of dharma or part of purushartha or Indian culture, as long as artha is being accomplished within the framework of dharma. So that this graph itself shows that India was not spiritually, economically weak, even though it was always ahead in spirituality and in dharmic principles, right? So it's not an either or phenomenon, that economy versus spirituality or so. Yeah, so that would be my response to that question.
Right. There was another very interesting question with regards to yoga, and this particular person said, I'm forgetting the name, but he said that why yoga is so popular and not the other aspects of Indian civilization. For instance, you delved on dharma, which is again a very central to it. But there is so much of philosophical diversity with regards to philosophical thought. There is also too much of thinking with regards to sciences. Yet that is not so popular. And what can we do in order to popularize that aspect of Indian value system also?
Yes.
So you want to sort of stop sharing this?
Yes, that's pretty correct. That yes, yoga is now global phenomenon, but not many other principles or ideas or philosophies from India.
Right.
I think the reason could be, and this is my 2 cents. We all have to keep thinking. I think my 2 cents would be that yoga, when it was incorporated into American culture, right? Now, no American health or fitness center can work without having some yoga class. There is yoga class in all YMCAs and all Jewish community centers and all kinds of fitness centers here.
Right.
So once it became an American popular, not just a counterculture, but main culture, pop culture of America has embraced yoga like anything, right? So yoga has become a global phenomenon now. Eventually, and India also started thought of proposing it to United Nations that we should celebrate International Yoga Day. It is after that the almost all entire world immediately accepted it at the United Nations, and they proposed it to have it as a international phenomenon now, June 15th. So I think 2 things are going on here. That the strength of India itself, our own self-confidence, must be demonstrated first, that we believe and embrace our own philosophies wholeheartedly, right? Not just yoga, but other ideas also. And then when the mainstream cultures of other countries, other superpowers, especially other major countries, when they accept it, as our strength reflects in other countries also. I think also the side by side, what has been happening for the last 25 years is the rise of Indian diaspora, right? Without actively spreading any idea from by us, by Indians living in the US, by some certain indirect processes, ideas such as vegetarianism, ideas such as Ayurveda, and of course yoga, they have spread because I think of the presence of the Indian diaspora in America also has played some role in this spread of Indian ideas. Because when I came to US in 1996, there were hardly any options for vegetarian food. But now, even if I go to a remote village in New Mexico or Arizona or Utah, I can have vegetarian food even in those remote villages. That's a really interesting development that I've seen in my own observation in the last 25 years in the US. Right? So why that has happened? Because that could, Indian diaspora must have or might have played a major role, not consciously, but indirectly, because these things developed out of market needs, right? And also as Indian economy is growing, so people are looking for markets also to sell their products. So strength of Indian diaspora has helped spread spread of some of these ideas. As we grow further, as we develop our own confidence further, these things will take their own course and it will develop eventually. But first step is to have confidence in our own strength. Right? Even in India, there are hardly any universities or colleges or department where Indian spirituality is being taught as an academic subject. When we think of Indian spirituality or religious studies or dharmic studies, we think of gurus, right? We think of maybe Art of Living, maybe Sadhguru, maybe other ashrams, maybe other missions, and so Ramakrishna mission and so on. But we have not yet introduced these subjects as academic subjects within mainstream universities. My university is a rare example where I teach Jainism, I teach Hinduism, and so on. But we have to first, charity begins at home. We have to start teaching these subjects to our own students within India first. Then it will take care of its own. It will take its own ways, and these ideas will spread and develop further within India, and then eventually across the world.
Interesting. I think it's interesting you point that out because while, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is sort of a later development that we sort of have removed religious studies. I'm using religion in a very general sense, but these studies has been skewed out of the curriculum. But we have had some very phenomenal scholars and academicians who were also sadhaks. Someone like, let's say, Gurudev Ranade, or even to a certain extent, Lokmanya Tilak, who could sort of bring in religion and more. So some of these were hardly rooted in spirituality, but were equally good academicians. And somehow in the process, we sort of lost it out, and we do not. It's important that that is sort of begins from the institutional level in schools and colleges, where we teach it not just as a theology, but something which is to use a very loose expression, a kind of a way of life. If I'm right.
Yeah, right. So that's what we have to bring it back. Yes.
True. There is a very sort of interesting question from Nirmala Samant, who is associated with Rishihood University. She's asked that what is the relevance of Indian knowledge systems for the global challenges? And I think you brought in ecology and how, environmental sustainability obviously is a natural reflection for that. But we generally talk about world peace. Of course, a lot of leaders are talking about why philosophy and spirituality is going to lead towards that. So, is there any relevance? I mean, how do we sort of connect Indian knowledge systems or tradition to some of the global challenges which are pertinent today?
Yeah, I think we use these word world peace and climate change. So it is just complete, in my opinion, just impossible to achieve any of these goals without taking Indian principles, Indian knowledge systems really seriously, without stopping especially red meat consumption. It is just impossible to tackle climate change without adopting reverence for nature, reverence for sun and earth and trees and water and so on. It is impossible to achieve to stop climate change. Just impossible. There is no other way but to accept that, yes, trees are to be revered, nature is to be revered, earth is to be revered. And if we are using them, using any of the natural resources, we have to have utmost gratefulness, gratitude towards all the entire nature. So when, let's say, indigenous people, let's say tribal people, even in the US, there are native people and of course, indigenous people in India or communities such as Bishnois. If and when they are using some natural resources, they do it in an extremely sustainable ways with utmost gratitude. Take only whatever little that you need to take and then return it to nature, maybe grow more trees. If you're cutting one tree, maybe plant 10 more trees, and so on. And of course, red meat consumption, especially, probably it's a US term, red meat, that is beef. If you don't stop beef consumption, there is absolutely no way we can stop climate change, because what happens is that for beef to be consumed by Europeans or Americans, cattle are needed for beef, right? If cattle are to be raised for beef consumption, cattle needs food. That food comes at a cost of tropical forest. So first tropical forests are replaced, are destroyed. Those forest land become farms that grow food for cattle. Then those cattle are butchered. That beef, red meat, that beef comes to McDonald's or Burger Kings or all these restaurants and homes or grocery stores where beef is sold. So it's a whole chain of destroying first killing cattle. Cattle in turn kills forests because the food comes from that land, right? So the planet's health, and then red meat, once it is consumed by humans, it destroys human health also. So human health destruction is connected with planet's health destruction. Planet is being destroyed and human health is being destroyed. Again, this shows interconnection, which our people realize, Indians realize more than almost 3 millennia ago. Probably there was beef consumption in ancient time also, maybe, or some animal consumption, animal sacrifice, maybe. But what we see now for last more than 2 millennia is, even though animal sacrifice does happen at some Hindu temple, it's a rare phenomenon. Yes, there are some temples in Nepal or even Rajasthan, my home state in Rajasthan, or in Bengal, or Kamakhya temple in Assam. There are some animals being sacrificed in Kali temple in Kolkata, or Kamakhya temple in Assam, or Rajasthan, as I said, or even in Nepal. So Hindus even today are doing some animal sacrifice, but that's a very, very rare, almost extinct phenomenon. Largely, the entire Hindu population across the world, more than 1 billion Hindu people, have almost completely stopped animal sacrifices in their rituals, in their daily consumption of food. Even though some Hindus might be consuming meat, it's not a must element of their food, which is what is happening in US or Europe. If Hindus are taking meat, then maybe it's maybe once a day or once a week or once in 3 days so many days they will stop. Oh, it's a holy day. It's a Somvar hai, aaj nahi khana hai, ya Shukrvar hai, aaj nahi khana. I said there are so many self-imposed disciplines by Hindus to minimize their meat consumption and completely stopping use of sacrificing animals in their rituals. Something that must happen globally. That has not yet happened. That is now happening slowly because of, as I was hinting, because of actually the red meat consumption in US is now at a downward trend, which is good for the environment and also good for our own health or human health. But as it has to happen even more at a faster pace to really take seriously to try to stop climate change and to try to take care of our own human health. So all these things are interconnected, and sooner we realize and start practicing, better for our own health and for planet's health.
Right. I mean, again, this is very subtle, and I think you also explained how Bishnoi communities, which you sort of alluded to in your
That's completely vegetarian community.
Yeah.
Bishnois,
and how they sort of
also. Yes.
Right. How do they sort of see this as a dharma to sort of ensure that balance between the human life and the natural life sustains, and that is sort of cultivated through certain practices, traditions, and that those traditions survive as a sort of a living example of what dharma essentially is. which is, I think, this sort of a very subtle way to sort of ingrain, to explain a very intricate aspect of Dharma through traditions which can be accepted and sort of digested by common people. There is another very interesting question, and I think that is very coming from a research assistant from in Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute. Her name is Anaga, and she's saying that what are her prospects as a student of Indic studies, and this is now been asked, and I think there are two aspects. Of course, the question, the one who asked is not saying this, but I'm just sort of adding it up. But there are two aspects to this. There is, at one level, there is an sort of an outburst in terms of understanding this new. The government has sort of talked about Indian knowledge systems in the institutions that is coming up. But at another level, there is also some hesitance in the institutions to look at this as a proper academic format. There is also some hesitation among the accepted academic templates to, and there is also suspicion, skepticism to that. So there, the one who is researching or sort of getting into this new discipline, so to say, is also sort of quizzed by these. So how do you look at this new discipline emerging, and what it can contribute to academia as a whole?
Yeah, I think if you really apply these Indic categories, for example, what I was showing in my presentation is not to use the word religion or category of religion, but to apply Dharma, because again, it's an overarching principle to understand environmental practices, spiritual practices, and ethical practices of several communities in across India. Right? So that's at least a hint towards paradigm shift, that let's not apply the Western categories to study Indian phenomena, because in those categories are really based on the Abrahamic theological principles, because the word religion comes with the idea that there is one supreme God, and that it seems to be controlling and judging us from heaven, right? And there is a prophet who comes with a scripture, and that becomes the principle for the entire community. None of these things apply for India or for Japan or even China or even African communities or native communities in America, also North America, South America. So indigenous communities across the world don't really have this phenomenon of religion, right? Because religion is a very concrete, very like a closed system, right? Whereas Dharma in Indian context, or Tao in Chinese context, or Shinto in Japanese context, and so on, these are the extremely open ideas. There are multiple or infinite deities, what are called as kamis in Japan. So every tree is a kami, every tree is a deity. Just as we have in India, every tree is to be revered, right? Every particle is kan kan mein Bhagwan. Every particle in the universe is to be revered. Very similar in Japan, very similar in China, very similar in many indigenous communities across the world. So this is what we have to bring into academia, that we can't really make distinctions between living by ethics, living by religion, living by spirituality, or being environmentalist, right?
All right.
So to a student, coming back to your question by your audience, that if we really have to do something innovative in academia, we don't really have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to go back to how people are living, people are studying, people have been researching, people have been writing, studying for millennia in India and even other cultures. Right? So how did they arrive at the phenomenon of Shunya? They were not scientists who rejected religion, right? So in my colleagues used to say, I think in Iowa or even in Texas, that Athens and Jerusalem were always in conflict in the West. So philosophy and religion were in conflict. In other words, science and religion were in conflict for much of Western history, but not in India or Indian context, right? Where Bhaskaracharya is an acharya, but who also gave us many scientific and mathematical principles, Aryabhat and so many other, Madhvacharya and so many others, right? So if new student in India or student of Indology, coming from any ethnicity or any background, if they have to do something innovative, they have to simply think from these paradigms, which do not make any distinctions or boundaries or barriers. As in ancient times, they were They were spiritual, at the same time they were very extremely philosophical, scientific, and so on. So that is the way to develop it. And like I was suggesting, dharma or dharmic paradigm can be very helpful in promoting this paradigm shift. And so any student of Indology or even Indian anthropology, sociology, must start with first taking a lesson in Indian philosophy, where we see that dharma or dharmic interpretation are so wide-ranging, so diverse, yet so similar across Buddhism, Jainism, or Charvaka, which is the Gnostic philosophies, or Astic philosophies, the six, Vedanta and so on, Mimamsa and so on. So they must start with that. That will help them open up their boundaries, and that should be the prerequisite even for sociology, anthropology, or other fields. What happens today in India or even outside India, when they are studying anything about India, they directly jump into Indian history or Indian sociology or anthropology without really understanding, without applying Indian philosophical ideas to study sociology or anthropology or history. That has to change. I think that can be really helpful to take first with Indian philosophy, start with Indian philosophy, at least have some background that how Indians have been thinking and trying to interpret their own culture from these angles, from these lenses. I think that can be helpful. And that will make them hopefully more innovative, and something innovative they can contribute towards understanding India. Otherwise, we are just repeating same old colonial conclusions, and even after independence, we have been applying Marxist categories or other European categories that really don't do any justice to Indian phenomenon.
Right. And in that sense, I mean, now, of course, there is a lot of coinage, or there is a lot of currency to the interdisciplinary studies, but that is something which has always been very much part of Indian knowledge systems traditionally. I mean, there was no watertight compartments. You have to, like you said, the spiritualist was also an equally good scientist, was also an equally good poet at times. So this is interesting. Finally, I just have a last question, which I think will help sum up the entire discussion that we are having, and I think that is something which we also connect with, and that is, this question is sort of very significant in the sense that the person asks what we as an individual can do to promote Indic studies and encourage mass participation of people in understanding India. This is coming from Srimati Ganga Jaikumar, who's saying that what we as an individual can do. So of course, as an academia, we can always do that, but how do we sort of take it to mass level as a, if I may say, as a part of a living itself?
Yeah, I guess what you're doing as Mimamsa Foundation or so many other universities have now started in the last 5-10 years. So many foundations have come up. So many people, even in America and European countries, they're all trying to promote alternative paradigms, Indic paradigms, Dharmic paradigms. So I'm using Indic and Dharmic almost interchangeably, synonymously, because Indic phenomenon, in my opinion, cannot be understood without Dharma. Right? So Dharmic paradigm or Indic paradigm is what we have to promote. And one thing is, I think people become a bit hesitant in applying dharmic word, even as a word or even as a paradigm. Is I think they start seeing it as in opposition with minorities in India. In my opinion, even minorities in India cannot be untouched with the dharmic paradigm. Even they are different. Even minorities in India are living in India for centuries, and it is no way possible that even they are not influenced by some of the dharmic ideas, at least, some of their practices, behaviors, and I mean, we have to study it more deeply. Are the minorities in India different from their counterparts, let's say in the Middle East or in the European Western countries? That somebody has to study more carefully and more deeply. But overarching majority across India and across China, Japan, also, going forward, we should say that their style of working, style of living by ethical principles, the style of spirituality, how unique it is and how important it is to study from their own categories rather than applying European categories.
Right.
Does that answer your question? Or
sure, it does.
I mean, so what we should do. Okay, one more thing, if I may add, is that we have to, not just as a hobby. What happens is that I'm an engineer or doctor for my career, and as a side hobby, I will read some 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 books, and I start calling it myself as an Indologist. That is extremely dangerous. That is not to be. If we really are serious about promoting and studying India, we have to make sure that at the undergraduate level, we take Indian philosophy, we take it as our major career focus, as a major minor in terms of our courses, but also as a major focus in our life. So, yes, we have to promote Indic studies, we have to promote Indology, but somebody else, not my kids will become engineer or doctor, but somebody else will do Indology. So that has to stop. Indology has to become a mainstream career by every family, every child in India, if we're really serious. That should be the first step, right? So it cannot be it cannot be that my career is for money making practices, but as a side, on a weekend I go to listen to a guru, and that is end of my spirituality. That cannot really help. If we really are serious, it has to become our career. Right, more and more colleges and universities must start teaching it at undergraduate level. Our kids should take those courses. They should do BA or MA or PhD in Indology, and that hopefully will help in establishing more departments across India. Where there is now we need a major number of people who are experts in Indology from Indic categories. By realizing and practicing some of these principles in their daily lives and in their academic practices, that will be a true renaissance of, I think, Indology, of Indic studies across India and across the world.
Interesting. I think that note, I think it sums up our discussion today, and it begins, as you rightly said, by understanding what is Dharma and how it sort of becomes that explaining idea of what Indian civilization is. Thank you, Professor Jain, very much for taking out time and being with us for this second Justice Ranade Memorial Lecture. We really appreciate that, and I'm sure all our viewers would have had a better idea as to what we all need to do in order to start understanding India. And I think the very basic is to explain ourselves and to others what Dharma really is and how it is something which is very significant to understand India. So thank you all of you for joining us. Do let us know in the comment section how you like this video. What are what is it that we should be doing, and what is it that should come as that should come as a significant aspect of understanding India. So please comment on this, subscribe to our YouTube channel, to visit our website. It contains all the research articles that we publish at Mimamsa's website. It will also have all the other details with regards to what Mimamsa Foundation for Indic Studies is doing and is up to. So visit us at www.bharatmimamsa.com and also subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. With that note, I once again want to thank Professor Jain for delivering this very insightful lecture. I also want to thank Ranade Realtors for generously supporting this Justice Ranade Memorial Lecture initiative. With that, thank you and see you soon.